The views and opinions expressed in this broadcast are those of the speakers or authors and do not necessarily reflect or represent the views and opinions held by the producers of this broadcast. The material herein is for entertainment purposes only.
Welcome to Afterlife Radio. I am Kalila Smith coming to you live from New Orleans, the mystical land of voodoo. And I'm going to be exploring today a little bit about what happens to us on the other side. What does Spirit say about the land where they're living? And at the top of the hour, we're going to talk a little bit more about some of the things that one can do to connect better if they are a budding medium. And I want to introduce my co-host here, Billy Roberts, live from Cornwall in the UK. Hello, Billy. How are you this morning?
Hi, Kalila. It's really nice to speak to you. I'm fine, thank you. And the weather picks you up a little bit, doesn't it? The sunshine.
Oh, it does. It does. The sunshine is beautiful. Sunshine is beautiful. The heat, maybe not so much. They could turn that down a bit, but, we'll take what we can get, right?
Yeah.
So, Billy, some of the things that I run across, and I'm sure you have too, certain, spirits will come through and they talk about some of the other things that they do over there. We think of the other side and we always tend to think of it from our perspective. We all sometimes, lose perspective of what's going on with them on the other side. And there is a world over there. It's not just they pass and then they're hovering around us 24/7 watching every little thing we do. People don't seem to realize that their loved ones do have things going on the other side. And there's various stages to what happens to one on the other side. Don't you agree?
Absolutely. But I think that the thing that most people have difficulty with is trying to comprehend the fact that the spirit world, for want of a better description, is not a place. It has nothing whatsoever to do with places. It lies in no special position. It's not in the north, south, or the east. It orbits within and around the physical atom. So it interpenetrates the physical world. It's a transcendental state. So I know from my own experiences. I work with a group called the Elders, who are beings. I don't know who they were or what they've done in their life, but the sort of monastic individuals, and each one of them has given me a different perception or conception of what happens after when you die. And the first thing that happens, if you've ever been with somebody who's passed away, is they lose their physical senses very gradually. They can't feel anything, and their astral senses become very active. So they begin to see deceased relatives or friends, people who've gone many, many years before, who come for them. And there are different, and this, again, it's my opinion. The spirit world is divided into layers, as you've just said. And each layer is of a finer material than the one below it. So we're living in this sort of multidimensional universe that goes on and on and on in infinite succession. And I do believe, because when we pass over, and I'm in no rush to find this out, by the way, I'm only going by what,
right.
in case anybody's listening to me,
right.
That there are processes of learning, and I think each individual is allotted a job, but they have to go to these schools of learning where these highly evolved souls are passing on information to them. If a person dies in traumatic circumstances, who's been ill for a long time with cancer, or whose demise is brought about by an accident, it is my belief that they go into these healing halls where they're sort of anesthetized or put to sleep for a while they're bathed in different energies, different energetic colors. And then they're gradually awakened to this new life. Some people who've come back have described the process of death as they close their eyes in this world as though they were falling asleep. And when they opened them again, it was as though they'd woken up in a different dimension. And one other interesting theory, which was given to me, was the dead don't go anywhere, that they merely fall asleep. When they wake up, they pass into this sort of parallel universe where all the people they've left behind are still there in a different form, spiritually speaking. So there are different theories to the process of death. I mean, obviously, the only way to find out is to experience it for yourself, because nobody really knows. We're only going by what our spirit guides and the people who have passed over have come back, what information they've brought back with them. Some of them are quite specific about what happens. I might have told you the story of the man who communicated in a theater I was doing many years ago.
No, I didn't hear that.
Well, this man had communicated. It was a big theater, and he told me his name was, I can't remember his name, but he said, Joe, my name's Joe, blah, blah, blah. And I want to communicate with my wife. I want to speak to my wife, Louise, who's in the first or second row with a red coat on. But when I looked down, there was a group of people, and they all had red in varying degrees on. And I said, I need to locate somebody called Louise, blah, blah. And this woman put her hand up. And I said, I've got your husband, Joe, here. And she immediately began to cry and sob. And she was consoled by her friends who handed her a tissue to dab away the tears from her cheeks. And then there was silence. And I mentally said to this man, well, what have you got to say? He said, I've only just passed over. So he'd been dead a week or so. I said, I've got you. And she started crying and mumbling. And he said, I don't know why she's crying. She made my life a misery. And I didn't know what to say. He said, and I just want her to know that when she comes over, I will be with my first wife, Betty. And I said, oh. And so I looked at this woman, and this is a true story. It actually happened to me. And I looked at the woman who was inconsolable, and I said, Joe is saying he loves you very much. And I moved away from the woman, and that's all he's got to say. And there was a few expletives coming from Joe, who was quite a character, but I moved away from the woman. I mean, she confronted me after when the show was over. She bought a book from me, asked me to sign it, and asked me a few questions. So I've never forgotten that, but sometimes I relate that story when I'm doing a show. And Dolly said to me, my wife Dolly, she says, Billy, you shouldn't tell the audience that, because they'll think you're lying to them every time you give them a message. So I don't. The only time I mention it is when I'm talking to you or somebody else. So it's quite funny. So they are very real. They can be very vocal, I've noticed. Some are very shy and incoherent. And the nature of communication is either very specific or incoherent. Now, I'm a clairaudient medium primarily. And it's like you can have clairaudience in different forms, such as extraneous thoughts coming into your mind, thoughts that are not your own. Or you can get the sense of somebody standing behind you, passing on information to you. But for me, it's like listening to a radio. It's got to be finely tuned in, and I can hear them when it's working really well, and they're very vocal. It's almost as though the person is sitting by me. Other times when the person is weak, it's incoherent, it's ambiguous, and the information they give is fragmented. Now, people say, well, why is the information very specific? Specific in as much as they can give details about the name of the road they lived in, the number of the door, the first, second names. And that's the way it works for me at its best. But other times, why is it sort of ambiguous, fragmented? And I can only surmise, and I've learned over the years, that it's to do with the individual, the person who wants to communicate. Sometimes they don't have the ability to communicate. And often this information is passed to a third party, an intermediary, which is either your spirit guide or the guide of the person who's trying to communicate. And we all know what it's like when information is passed around from one person to another. It changes. It's embroidered, or it just becomes something different altogether. So mediumship itself is experimental. And the spirit world itself is a transcendental experience. There are no alternating periods of night and day. So the people who inhabit the spirit world do not have any conception about time. And if they come to you in the middle of the night, doesn't matter who they are, you need to make it clear to them that it is in the middle of the night and you cannot allow them to communicate. They must come back at a more reasonable hour. So that's my view. That's the way I perceive it. And I think we've mentioned before that in Hinduism and Buddhism, they also have different spheres. Karmaloka is the first dimension you go to when you pass over, known loosely as the summer land. This resembles the earth from whence you've come. So it looks like this world, only more so. The colors are very iridescent, very vibrant. And then with the passage of time, with all the learning that you are subjected to and all the things that you bring out in your soul, you ascend then to something called the Devachanic planes. Now, Devachan means the land of the gods. And because everybody is a god in the making, but it just means primarily that it's pure experience. Life is the constant accumulation of knowledge, the storing up of the results of experience. And that's what the aim is, to learn as much as you can when you go over into the spirit world.
Step beyond the veil that separates our world from the world of spirits with me, Kalila Smith, as we uncover the mysteries of the afterlife. This is a spiritual journey as we try to discover if life really does continue after the physical death. Are after-death communications real, or do we imagine them? Get my book, Afterlife Mysteries Revealed, and find out. Afterlife Mysteries Revealed, available on Amazon.com by Kalila Smith.
Now, I've noticed that a lot of times when people first cross over, I mean, immediately when they first cross over, there's lots of times people will experience what I've always heard called the crisis apparition. The classic person sitting on the edge of the bed to tell you goodbye. And I actually had that happen when my daughter passed away. The next morning, I saw her as I got up. I sat up in bed and I looked out of the corner of my eye and I saw a young girl sitting next to me. And my daughter, for the sake of the listeners, had Down syndrome. And she passed away right before she turned 30. But the young girl that was sitting there, she had my daughter's hair. She had my daughter's eye color. But she looked like my daughter might have looked had she not had Down syndrome, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
And when I saw her out of I glanced to the corner of my eye and she sat there and she held her arms up like this, I don't know, and kind of shrugged her shoulders and laughed like, oh my gosh, look what I did. And instead of talking to her like I should have done, I was just so hysterical. I fell on the floor and just started screaming. And she disappeared, of course. And I always regretted that because I should have asked her questions. I should have talked to her more, but it just didn't work out that way. And I think she was letting me know that she was okay. But a lot of people do experience that. And I've always heard it called the crisis apparition. But then there seems to be a period in time in which you don't hear from them. Do you find that true in your experience, Billy, that it takes a while before they're really able to communicate back and forth easily?
Well, I think it depends on the individual, because I've had people communicate when they've only passed over hours before. But I do believe there is the passage of time where they need to acclimatize to their new life, to be re-energized. And regarding your daughter's Down syndrome, she wouldn't have that. That was just a physical abnormality, if you
Right.
like. So anything to do with the physical body changes. I mean, you might get somebody who goes through a lot of cosmetic surgery, alters their nose, their teeth, the way they look completely. But when they pass over, they resort back to the way they originally were, because these are physical abnormalities or physical issues.
Right.
In saying that, in the spirit world, there is no physical body. There is only pure experience and the essence of the soul. So, I mean, I think I might have told you this off when we weren't recording, but I sat with my mother when she passed over. She died of lung cancer, and she was semi-comatose. And after she passed, I sat. They left her body in the. I know it's morbid, but it happened. I sat with her body and I sat in a rocking chair, watching, and I noticed a strange phenomenon. There was like a spiraling energy from her feet. She wasn't covered up completely, but it was spiraling around her body and going out the top of her head. And it sort of gathered momentum, was quickening, and there were like sparkling lights around it. And then all of a sudden it stopped. And I felt a change in the atmosphere, a change in the feeling in the room, as though I knew that she'd gone completely. And I think there are different processes to when we pass over. I think people have always said the worst thing about dying is actually the physical and the chemical change that occurs in the body. But generally speaking, you go to sleep and you wake up the same person, but then you're faced with the offer or the opportunity to be re-embodied, to be reborn. And people say, well, what about my husband? What about my mother? What about the family that I loved? If I go over there and they've all reincarnated, but as long as love exists between a family, between a mother and daughter, there's going to be no reincarnation until the whole family unit have been reunited. And I also, talking to you, even when we've spoken time before, I know that Stephanie, I know she was special to you, but I've always had this sense, the overwhelming sense, that she was special, and her presence in this life was meant to be with you, to help you in your journey, and also to help her, because I know we believe in angelic forces, and I do, and I'm not just saying this to make you feel better, but it's an observation I've made. I know that she was an angelic presence, and where she is now, she's doing good work, not just with her mother, you. She's helping other people who were probably in a similar situation to herself, and also a similar situation as you. But I think also she's helping people with children, disabled children, and there seems to be a lot of children around her. So I think she's quite special in more ways than one.
Thank you for that. Yes, yeah, I've heard that from other mediums as well. And she was very different. You know, one of the first things that a medium told me was that she said it didn't seem much different being over there because she always walked in both worlds, and that was very true. She saw a lot of things, and she spoke to people, and it was very interesting because I would hear her in her room. She loved to play video games, and she would be playing her video games, and I would hear her talking to someone else. And I would knock on the door, and I would hear her say, "Shh, be quiet. It's my mom." And I'd say, "Stephanie, what are you doing?" And she would very, precociously say, "Nothing." And I'd say, "Who are you talking to?" And she'd say, "Nobody." And I'd be like, I hear you talking to someone. And she would say, "No, you don't." And so I'd say, okay, all right, well, I was just checking. And I would wait a few seconds and I'd hear her tell someone, that was close. She almost saw you.
Oh,
And
that's
she
good.
would do this sort of thing all the time. And it was, it wasn't until after she passed that I realized how close she was to those spirits. And a very close friend of mine had passed literally 8 months to the day before she did. And I didn't realize, and she didn't know him. She actually knew his sister, who was a teacher of hers, but she didn't know him. And I didn't realize what was happening until after she passed. But for the longest time, she started sitting up late at night, and she did have early onset Alzheimer's, and she would do what was called sundowning, where she would have her days and nights mixed up. But she would sit up at the kitchen table coloring. And I got up one night, and I walked into the kitchen, and she was talking to someone. And when I walked in, she said, "Shh, be quiet. It's her." And I said, "Stephanie," I said, "who were you talking to?" And she looked at me very seriously and she said, "You know his name?" And I said, "No, I don't. Why don't you tell me?" And she said, "Well, you know who he is." And she's still coloring the whole time and being very serious. And she starts telling me, "Well, you know who he is. You tell me his name. You tell me." And I said, "You're really starting to scare me." And I said, "I think it's time you go back to bed now." And when I walked away, she started mumbling to him, "She's not going to tell us what to do." And I didn't realize it until after she passed that apparently she was seeing him. And I think he was waiting for her.
Oh. See all that makes sense to me. And a lot of children with Down syndrome and other conditions are mediumistically inclined. Mediumship itself, as I've said before, is not a normal state of being. There are abnormalities in our brains that allow us to monitor changes in the atmosphere. And children, particularly people with conditions like Down syndrome, or even autistic children, they tend to have a natural ability to home into things and communicate with disembodied souls quite naturally. And there's always a good sense of humor, as you've just explained. They always have a good sense of humor. And death is a non-word because death doesn't exist. There's no such condition as death. There is only change, transmutation, growth, becoming a movement of matter or of consciousness from one condition to another. Nothing can ever die, as we know. Energy can't be destroyed. It transmutes into different forms. And so I think when we enter this beautiful universe, the supersensual universe, we enter a beautiful, exciting journey or embark upon it. And we meet some incredible people. I mean, I know who I'd like to meet. I'd like to meet Julius Caesar and Elvis Presley. There are some celebrities I'd love to meet, but whether they still have the exalted state when they die. I mean, kings and queens, for an example, by their very nature, they isolate themselves from other disembodied souls. So it's incredibly fascinating, don't you think?
Absolutely. You have to wonder what transpired on the other end to get that person to be in the role that they played at that time. And like you just said, what are they over there? Are they the same person? Because I know from the different experiences that I've had with spirit, and I've heard it said by many other people, including yourself, we retain our personalities. Yeah. We retain our talents, our abilities. And it's interesting because what does happen to people of royalty or to someone like Elvis Presley? Is he still the king of rock and roll? Is he still someone, who would have that status? Or is it just a role that he played in this lifetime that he had here?
Stay tuned for more Afterlife Radio.
Follow me, Kalila Smith, into the mysterious world of spirits. Searching for Spirits, the ultimate guide for ghost hunters, is a concise how-to manual for anyone who enjoys a good ghost hunt. Learn the history of spiritualism, learn what a ghost is and what is not. Learn the truth about poltergeist. We'll also delve into the realm of spiritual beings that never were human, the world of demons, real vampires, and we'll look at some real case studies. This is a must-have for everyone interested in ghost hunting, from the novice to the expert. Completely updated in its second edition, this is one of the first guides for ghost hunting based on actual first-hand experiences. Available on Amazon.com. Searching for Spirits, the ultimate guide for ghost hunters, by Kalila Smith.
You're listening to Afterlife Radio.
Well, I'm pretty sure that the ego governs what they do. And by his very nature, I think he's still in that position whereby he's revered as an icon and people would look up to him. So it's other people, the way they place him on a pedestal. But royalty, for an example, kings and queens, and people like Henry VIII, who if he wanted to get rid of his wife, he just had them executed. Perpetrators of certain crimes. I mean, all these people fascinate me because I sat down once with the elders. I was doing a column for a magazine called A Greater World, Christian spiritualist magazine. And I was able to ask them specific questions and about God in particular. And none of them could answer the question whether God was a reality. They all said the same thing. There is an omnipotent, omnipresent power that governs everything. God's law is evolution. And so I said, well, what about when you go, people, Christians particularly, you pass over, if you're the perpetrator of a heinous crime, who doles out the punishment? And they said, you do yourself by your conscience. Because when you pass over with all this burden on your soul, you realize it's a very cold, isolated world that you're living in, very dark and dismal. And the only way to ascend to a warmer climate or higher vibrations is to realize what you've done. So you're governed by your own conscience. And conscience seems to be the real God in you. And that, to me, that makes sense.
Right.
When we think about it. And in Buddhism and all the Eastern religions, they don't have a particular single deity. They have many different deities to control different aspects of a person's life. So the whole thing is a learning experience.
It really is. We never stop learning, and I don't think we stop learning on the other side either. We continue to learn.
Exactly.
And it is very fascinating. But speaking of royalty, one of the people who I admire most in life, and you being British would really appreciate this, one of my most favorite people in the whole wide world is the Queen Elizabeth II. I think that she is one of the, number one, she's been a monarch for so long, but I am fascinated with her life and with her experiences.
Yes.
And she's to be admired as a huge role model for women.
Yeah.
And, you look at her and people think, oh, a princess sitting and eating bonbons. And this woman was a princess working as a mechanic during the war. I mean, just such an admirable person. And I just love the Queen. And so I watch all of these documentaries about her, and I've been watching the show on Netflix, The Crown, and everything.
Yeah.
And what's so remarkable is that you look at this sort of thing, and it's a typical theme where her uncle was king. Her father did not set out to be king. He was not to be king.
Yeah. And
through no fault of his own, and certainly no manipulation on their part, the tables turned, and his brother did what he did. He stepped down from the throne, leaving it to her father. And the next thing you know, she is heir to the throne, and she didn't want it. She didn't expect it. It was almost like she was born to be that queen. She was born to be that monarch. And she stepped up to the plate, and she took the role so very well. And better than probably any human being, but it was like, it's so clear to see that she was born to be who she is in this life.
Yeah,
So I
exactly.
look at that and it's like, there's so many times you see people that the twist of fate that happens to put them in the roles that they are, it's like it was meant to be. So you
Exactly.
really have to question, when she passes, will she still be that person on the throne with the crown, or will she just finally get to be Lilibet, just
I,
that
I,
girl
th-
that wanted to enjoy herself?
I think some of the some queens and kings are quite special. I think she's one of them. The only thing I'm against, I'm only a royalist because of the Queen. My wife's a royalist, but it's the other hangers on. Well, the rest of the family, I'm not really that keen on. I mean, I like Prince Charles because he's got some good ideas, but I don't. I'm all these hangers on who I don't know what they do. Some of them, but the Queen, I think, is quite special and will remain special. It's just that people will be able to try. They will be able to get closer to her when she passes over. I think she's got some years to do yet. But I think it's all to do with karma. She was meant to be. And I was 7 years old when, I think I was 7 years or 5 years old, when I was in a shop with my mother and somebody said, the king has died. And the coronation, when she was crowned in 1953, they had parties for children in the streets, all tables along all the little narrow streets, and bunting up, and it went on for days. A lot of people just use it as an excuse to get drunk, but it was a huge, it was a huge celebration, and we were all given a commemorative mug, a coronation mug, and a penknife with the Queen on it. And it was really, and when you look at these documentaries, the way she's evolved, there is something special about this woman. There's something quite special. I think there's a lot, what was the king's touch, where people used to believe that if they could touch the robe of the king, and I think she's a prime example of that. I think she has qualities that we underestimate. The Queen's touch. I'm sure if she touched some people, they would be healed in many ways.
Right, right. I agree. I agree. Yeah, she's very special, but clearly a case of she was meant to have that role,
Yes,
and maybe perhaps had that role before. And it's like she didn't really plan for it, but when it fell upon her, she knew what
yeah.
she had to do. She knew it. She took it on. She didn't resent it. She immediately stepped up into that role because she knew that's where she was supposed to be. And I think she's just an amazing, amazing woman.
And you know something else, that the royal family are all interested in mediums. That Queen Victoria famously had John Brown, and John Brown, the guy that looked after her, he's a relative of my wife's family, and he was allegedly a trance medium. But they used to bring famous mediums to the palace to give readings to Victoria after her husband Albert died. Now I went. I was asked to go to a hotel, a prestigious hotel in London. This is when Diana was alive, and to give a reading to somebody, and it was Princess Diana, and it was probably some years before she passed over, and I gave it. I didn't like her, to be honest. I thought she was very cunning and very pretentious, and I think she knew what she was doing all the time.
I saw a documentary to that effect.
Sorry?
I saw a documentary
Oh, did you?
recently to that effect, that
Yeah.
That's what she was like.
She had an agenda, I think, from the very beginning. But I'm digressing a lot. A lot of the royal family are very, very interested in mediums, and the Queen is especially. I don't know how true it is. I write for a magazine called the Psychic News, which I'm going to interview you for. And
Oh, wow, great.
apparently the Queen is a subscriber. She receives a copy of the magazine. So, which is very interesting. So they're all interested. Even Prince Charles is interested in complementary stuff and psychics. And of course, they can't make this public knowledge because they'd be ridiculed. It's all interesting stuff.
It's very interesting. So we're going to take a little break right now. We're going to come back and we're going to shift gears a little bit and talk about how one who is developing as a medium, and even if you're not, the benefits of meditating and getting one's focus right. So we'll be right back.
Submitted for your approval. New Orleans. Seductive, magical, mysterious, and haunted. There is no place on this earth with as much ghost and vampire activity as New Orleans. Imagine, if you will, a tour. A tour that takes you to sites in the French Quarter of actual documented hauntings. The Haunted History Tour is just that tour. Every day, every night, all year round. This tour has been featured on ABC, CBS, NBC, and CNN. And it's available to you. Are there ghosts and vampires in the French Quarter? Find out by taking the tour that everyone is talking about. The Haunted History Tour. For more information, call Haunted History Tours at 861-2727. That's 861-2727. This is not a Halloween spookhouse. This is real.
And we're back. So we're going to have Billy tell us a little bit about his thoughts on meditation and fine-tuning one's focus.
Well, interesting. I mean, one of the innovators of meditation in modern day was the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. And in fact, my introduction to TM was through John Lennon, who told me about a meeting that was going on in a hotel in London, given by this guru that the Beatles were following. And I went along with some of the band I was with to this. And it was a very diminutive man. He was a physicist, the Maharishi. And it was all to do with vibration. He had a squeaky little voice. And TM, Transcendental Meditation, involves the repetition of a mantra, a syllable, or any word that's pleasing. It produces a calming effect on the mind. Now, I practiced TM for some time because I went through, in the 60s, a traumatic period in my life. I had a drug problem. The problem was I couldn't get enough, I joke. And I came back to the UK for treatment in 1970. And I was in and out of different clinics, and I had lots of hang-ups and depressions, and nothing worked for me. And the mediumistic skills, they started to manifest again from when I was a kid, but in a creative sense. And I thought meditation seems to be something that will help me. Now, TM didn't work for me. So I explored different concepts of meditation. And I found something called threefold attunement, which involved three processes. One was concentration, contemplation, and then meditation. Now, it helped me no end, helped me to control anxiety levels. And if I was ever depressed, I only had to go into my little brown study and turn off and just meditate for 10, 15, maybe 20 minutes. Time was irrelevant. Now, concentration can take any form because most people with anxiety problems have butterfly minds. They flit from one thing to another. They find it very difficult to concentrate. So if you take something like the flame of a candle and just light a flame of a candle and have it on a table at as near to eye level as possible, probably a couple of feet away from you in subdued lighting, and just gaze at it. Now, we all know the effect of looking at a flame or the coals of a fire. It's quite hypnotic and it calms you immediately. But if you stare at the flame of a candle and you try to resist the temptation to blink or move your eyes one way or the other, just look at the flame until you can't stare any longer, till your eyes begin to tear. You close your eyes very slowly and you place your hands over them and apply a little bit of pressure to the eyeball. Now, you stay like that until the after image of the flame, which is usually in the complementary color, would be in blue or green, when it becomes fragmented, breaks up and disappears, you open your eyes and you return your gaze to the flame. Now this has to be done 3 times. You do it 3 times and then you turn off and you just sit and you relax. Now concentrate on your breathing. Diaphragmatic breathing is when you're breathing from the lower part of your abdomen. You breathe in either to the count of 6 or whatever you're capable of doing. You hold your breath for the count of 3. You exhale through pursed lips. Hold it for 3. Inhale for 6. Hold it for 3. So on and so forth. That calms you down. And then we turn our mind to contemplation. Now, contemplation is a strange one, particularly for someone who suffers from anxiety. But contemplate on the goal, what it is you're looking for from meditation. What are you trying to achieve? Whether it's to control your anxiety levels, your depression, or whether it's to precipitate some inherent qualities, mediumistic or creative qualities. But try to go on a journey in contemplation, just sitting quietly and allow your mind some freedom to just run around, to look at different things, but what you want to achieve, but project into the future. And the mind is good at projecting into the future because it's limitless. We're very creative individuals. And when you feel you've exhausted that, spend no more than 10 minutes on it, then you turn to meditation. Now, meditation can take many forms, but the most popular one, isn't it, is mindfulness. Now, with mindfulness, you're having to keep your mind confined to the now. So it's very difficult if you're focusing your attention on your nose to begin with your eyes closed. Make sure that your chest, your neck, and your head are as nearly in a straight line as possible, with your shoulders thrown slightly back, and just focus your attention on the tip of your nose. Be conscious of the inflowing breath, making sure the inhalations and exhalations are evenly spaced. And then you try not to think of anything outside of that room. Don't think about what you've done prior to the meditation, what you've done that day. Don't think about what you're going to do, what you've got to do later on in the day, what you're going to cook for an evening meal, what you're going to do tomorrow. None of that. Confine your thoughts to yourself and what you're doing at the moment. And if your mind wanders, even for a brief moment, just concentrate on your breathing, the inflowing and outflowing breathing. Just feel that rhythm of your breath. Now, if you're focusing on your breath, your inflowing and outflowing breathing, then you can't think of anything else. So focus your attention on the now and try to maintain that for as long as you possibly can. It's very, very difficult. It's a difficult process to maintain, so you probably won't do any more than 10 minutes. And then when it's over, you relax your body, take a few deep breaths, and always hydrate the body with a nice glass of charged water. You take a glass of water and you pour it into another glass backwards and forwards through the air until it sparkles and seems to come alive. And that's charging it with pranic energy. And then drink it very slowly and then relax and then go about your daily routine. It's very good for charging, recharging the batteries. It's good for anxiety, controlling it. And if you're mediumistically inclined, you want to develop your abilities, then meditation is the key to self-mastery. Do you agree to that, Kalila?
Absolutely, yes. I think that it's very difficult for most people when they first start doing it. It took me many years to get to that point. And a lot of it had to do with what I was studying at the time, because I became a shiatsu practitioner, basically acupressure. And one of the things that we had to learn was to, what the Japanese called, have an empty head, to have nothing in your mind while you were doing work on someone. And you had to develop this skill of being able to remove all thoughts from your mind and literally have nothing in your mind while you were doing work on someone. And it took a while, but now I can easily jump right into it. It's you know, it's after a few decades, it was like, okay, yeah, I know how to do this now, but it takes some practice. It really does. It takes a lot of practice. A lot of people have a hard time turning that mind off, especially people who tend to be left-brained, you know, tend to be very analytical. It's difficult for people to turn off that inner dialogue. And one of the things that I used to do, that I practiced doing, was every time a thought would come into my mind, I would visualize it being a cloud and watch it float away.
Mm-hmm.
And would continue to just focus on the breathing, just constantly focus only on the breath. And that trained me to kind of stay in the now and not allow anything else in. And anytime I would get my mind wandering, I would focus again on the breath and only on the breath.
Yeah, people don't realize how important rhythmic breathing is. I mean, I use the word pranayama as an umbrella term because there are different degrees of pranayamic exercises, different methods, different processes. But, you know, in the Western world at school, we're taught to expand our chest, to breathe and expand our chest as we breathe in. But that's not the way to breathe. Diaphragmatic breathing is a different process altogether. And if you're anxious, you have to learn to slow your breathing right down, as though you're passing the oxygen from the upper part of your lungs down to the diaphragm, and breathe rhythmically in that way. And it's also important if you're a budding medium, you're planning on embarking upon a course of mediumistic work, whether it's in a theater or in a platform, as we call it, in a spiritualist church. You know, it can make you nervous. And I was told once by a lady who I sat with, she was a Romani. Her name was Sylvia Alexio, long since gone. And I sat with her for 4 years. And I said to her about when I'm working, I get a churning tummy, like a nervous feeling. And she says, the day you don't get that churning tummy is the day you give up. She said, because it's the sun center and the spirit world work through that part of your anatomy. And it's important that you feel that adrenaline in your tummy. And that's how they work. And I've never really forgotten it. It puts you off sometimes because when I don't feel, because you can become a little bit complacent the more you work as a medium, particularly if you're getting good responses from the audience. It's very easy to fall into the trap of complacency and ego. And that has to be controlled too. But mediumship also requires focus and attention, because when the spirit will communicate, you're using both sides of your brain, and it's a three-way process. Often you're concentrating on what you're saying to the person to whom the message is given. You're also listening or being aware of any feelings that come to you from an external source. And then you've got the third party who could be a spirit guide, an entity that's helping you with your delivery. So, you know, women more than men can listen to two conversations at once. Women, we call it nosiness, but women can be involved in a conversation with somebody, and they can listen in to a conversation that's taking place on the other side of the room, because they're well equipped to do that. And you need to be aware of the different sensations that come over to you when you're working or developing as a medium. It's also not healthy to be tuning in all the time. If you're sitting in a group, developing your skills, and you go home, don't be giving messages to everybody who comes to you. It doesn't matter how or what you feel for them. You have to turn off, because it can make you very, very, mediumship can make you very nervous. It can also make you very depressed, because it's working on the hormonal system, and changes do occur in your body when you're developing your mediumship. Meditation itself, there was some research done in America, California University, and they found people who practice meditation on long term, people who've done any kind of meditation over years, the brain altered at the back. The prehistoric brain seemed to be a little bit larger in them than it was in a person who didn't meditate. So meditation does do things for you. And going back to my little sojourn earlier on in the late 60s and 70s, meditation really helped me to perceive things differently. It also helped to precipitate my skills as a medium and helped me to understand what was going on inside my brain. And that's why I started studying psychology, because I wanted to understand more about the neurological changes in a medium's brain. Fascinating stuff.
It is very fascinating. Yes. Very, very fascinating. So what advice can you give to someone to help them develop that focus, develop that, just if they've never done it before, if they've never tried meditation, or if they've never tried focusing, is there something other than what you've already said? I know you gave one long little exercise. I mean, is there something that, a little tip that they can do in the course of a day that might make them be able to kind of tune into that part of themselves?
Well, first of all, I always say to any students of mine, it's not going to happen overnight. They might be pleased with what they've achieved one day, the next day, but all of a sudden it can be taken away from you and you might find yourself back to square one. But one of the things that's vitally important is relaxation. If you're planning on sitting with a group in the evening, it's important to sit by yourself, perhaps in a nice, comfortable chair, and just relax as completely as you possibly can and try to turn your mind off. We know the mind is a computer, and some people find it very difficult to empty their mind, but relaxation is important. Also, eating. I would suggest that they don't eat a large meal a couple of hours before they go to their development circle. But focus and attention is important to allow you to become more observant and aware of the thoughts that come into your brain. There's something called retrospective memory as well, which I notice occurs in a lot of developing mediums. And retrospective memory in psychology is the ability to recall something you didn't know you knew. Now, I'm talking about giving a message to somebody that you might not be aware of. You've given it before, probably could be 2 years before. But the medium's mind becomes like a magnet, a storehouse, and it also stores lots of different data. So we need to clear things out occasionally. And clearing out is becoming aware of it and breathing properly. So a good, healthy diet is important. And also, I was going to say abstain from alcohol, but I won't say that because abstain from alcohol, obviously, before you're working. But a little tipple does you good. But really just have, mediumship has to carry some principles and morals. Sometimes I've met mediums who are inside devils and outside angels. And you have to have character and personality. And I think I mentioned to you that in our center, when mediums come to us, the first thing we do is to train their presentation, their personality, because we've had this discussion before. It doesn't matter how good and evidential a medium is. If they're boring with no personality, mediumship is not going to work, because the audience need to have some resonance. They need to harmonize with you. And the only way you can do that is by presenting your mediumship in a professional, articulate way with personality. This sounds silly, but one of the things I did before I started out on the platform was I used to record my voice, record the way I spoke, imagine I was giving a message to somebody, and also look at myself in a mirror, mannerisms. Some mediums have annoying traits, like pacing up and down a platform or stage. You need to control the way you repeat yourself and also be aware of the way you speak as well. But relaxation is important, and that's all I can say about that.
Right. I agree. Totally agree. Well, we have pretty much used up all of our time today. It went by very, very quickly. If anyone is interested in getting a hold of Billy, because he also, does private readings, and you do your handwriting psychic reading as well, tell them how they can get in touch with you for that.
I'm on Facebook, just as Billy Roberts, but they can email me at billyroberts@sky.com. And all that I would need is a random piece of handwriting. And also I can say at this point that if you're in the UK and you'd like a Skype or telephone reading from Kalila, you can also contact me at the same address. So Kalila is giving readings too.
Yes, I am. And repeat your email address, please, because you got a little scratchy right there.
It's Billy Roberts, all lowercase, @sky.com.
Perfect. Yes, we both do private readings, and we're happy to talk to you. And also, if anybody's got questions they would like addressed on the show, please check out our private group discussion page on Facebook. You can personal message us, either one of us, and we can invite you to that page, or you can go to it. It's Afterlife Radio Podcast Group, and just click on it that you'd like to join the group. We'd be happy to add you, and we are most interested in your thoughts and your questions and joining in on the discussions. And let us hear from you. Tell us if there's anything you'd like us to talk about on a future show. So thank you all for tuning in. We had a wonderful time as always. Thank you, Billy, and y'all have a wonderful evening.
Goodbye.